Any book that sends me on a full-blown Google search is always a winner in my eyes, or accurately, a winner in my bookshelves. And this one was really a winner. Actually, this is why it was probably the winner of the International Booker Prize 2026. And the book that I'm talking about is Taiwan Travelogue by, I'm sorry if I butcher this name, Yáng Shuang-zi, and it was translated by Lin King from Taiwanese to English. And this book did more than just surprise me, and not just in a way that I went to look for information about Taiwanese history, but the way in which it just made me extremely hungry while I was reading it. And when I say hungry, I mean do not read this book on an empty stomach. I regret doing that. This book is more than just about colonialism and the history of Taiwan and the colonialism by Japan. It's also about language and about interpretation, about identity and about class and about desire and about power and about yearning. But also it's about the different types of food, about winter melon tea, about dumplings, about braised pork rice. It's also about the different types of sauces and textures and ingredients and cooking methods that have long histories of their own. So basically in this video, I'm going to talk about this book that has somehow become one of the most culinary journeys that I have taken in a book in quite a long time without having to leave my sofa or my home. And considering that this was one of the first ever books, or this actually is my first time ever reading a Taiwanese author, and also my first Taiwanese novel, or my first novel that is set in Taiwan, I had a lot of learning to do, and it has really made me want to read more from Taiwanese authors. So if you have any recommendations, please send them my way. And of course, August feels like the perfect month to be talking about this book and to be recommending this book, because August is Women in Translation Month, or WIT month if you are online. This was a movement that was started by Metial Ratsiki back in 2014, I believe, as a way of just encouraging readers to discover literature and to celebrate women who are writing in languages other than English. And every August, I'm also quite new to this. I think this is my second year that I'm being part of it, or that I've followed this movement. So every August, readers and reviewers and booksellers around the world are encouraged or use this month to highlight such literature. And of course, Taiwan Travelogue feels particularly perfect because this is a translation that isn't just about something that happened in the novel, because there's translation in the novel, but also the way the novel has been translated into English to make it more accessible to more people. So translation is one of the things that the novel is about. Who is allowed to translate? Who gets to be translated for? What gets lost during translations? And what is, during translation, what is deliberately softened for the person who is on the other side? And also what happens when two people technically understand the same words, but they occupy different classes or different positions of power? These are the questions that arose in this book, or arose for me while I was reading this book. So the novel takes part in Taiwan around May 1938. And this was back when Taiwan was still under the colonial rule of Japan. And our main character is a young Japanese writer or a novelist. She's called Aoyama Chizuko. And she's like I said, she's a young Japanese writer who has traveled from Nagasaki, where she hails from. So she travels to Taiwan. She's been invited to to come and write a book while traveling through Taiwan. So this was the time when Taiwan was still under Japanese colonial rule. So she's invited by the Japanese government, but rather than go for these official banquets and carefully controlled encounters, she kind of decides that she wants to see or to discover Taiwan or the island through her own eyes. She wants to avoid these control situations. And most importantly, she wants to eat while she's on this journey. That is so relatable because I think traveling through food and seeing a country through food is such an amazing way. So she's paired with this young Taiwanese interpreter called Chizuru, who becomes her guide and her translator and her companion, and also sometimes becomes her cook, which increasingly becomes something very hard for Chizuko, the Japanese author, to define, because lines are now getting blurred. Let's just say that. So these two women start this journey. So they travel through Taiwan. They take trains. They have long conversations. They eat. They misunderstand each other. They understand each other. They agree. They eat again. And underneath what initially feels like this wonderful eat and travel and food narrative, the author really is, in a very interesting way, she is exposing questions about colonialism, about class, about language, and also about an equal relationship between, of course, the colonizer and the colonized. And I think this was, for me, something that the book really did in a very clever way. Because if, like me, your knowledge of Taiwanese history before reading this book could generously be described as developing, or this is what I've gathered so far in the short time. So Taiwan became a Japanese colony back in 1895 after the Qing government ceded the island to Japan following the first Sino-Japanese War. So the Japanese colonial rule lasted, I think, until the end of the Second World War in 1945. So when this novel takes place, it is 1938. So Taiwan has already been under Japanese rule for like more than 40 years. And this is also happening against the backdrop of Japan's expanding war in China, where large-scale fighting has already broken out, I think, in 1937. So knowing that really completely changes the way, when you read some of these conversations in the book, you see Chizuko is the author, she can move through Taiwan believing herself to be simply a curious visitor. But she isn't just a visitor, she is Japanese. She belongs to the colonial power, which makes her a class above the islanders. And Chizuru, on the other hand, the translator, cannot simply forget that, because now they are living together and they are traveling together and they happen to like each other. They are at par, or they are on the same level. No, it's the imbalance follows them everywhere. And as you read the book, you see such scenarios happening. It's on the trains, it's in the hotels, it's also in the language that they use. It's also in, like, who has the financial means. It's also about who gets to ask questions without fearing the repercussions of such questions. And even it's also at the dinner table, who gets to sit where. That is all explored in the book. And now let's get to my favorite part of the book. And in my opinion, my favorite character in this entire novel, the food. I don't know how many of you know Anthony Bourdain. I don't know him personally. I did not follow him. The Anthony Bourdain train left me along the way. I found out about him after he was dead. So I reference him here because while I was reading this book, I kept thinking, like, maybe this is what people mean when they talk about how Anthony Bourdain travel through food. Because Taiwan Travelogue never treats food as this decoration. We get really, really deep. We get to find out the different ingredients, the preparation, the processes, the textures, the combinations, the different aromas, the regional differences in which food is eaten in which area, the origins and the traditions that surround different foods. And gradually, as you're reading this book, you realize just how the author is telling us a history of Taiwan through what people in Taiwan eat. So in this case, foods acts like a memory. It holds memory. It becomes evidence of migration, of colonialism, of trade, of class, of power, of intimacy, like of family. And food becomes a way for Chizuru to communicate things that she doesn't necessarily want to say directly. So she uses food to bring the message across to Chizuko. For me, the closest comparison that I kept on thinking about while I was reading this book was the Netflix series High on the Hog, How African American Cuisine Transformed America, which is actually based on a book by Jessica B. Harris. Not because they are telling the same history or they're telling us about the same regions, obviously not, but because they made me think about how cuisine is so much bigger than just recipes. What arrives on a plate can contain so much. It contains centuries of movement, of survival, of adaptation, of power, of history. So much is on a plate that we are served. And I think Taiwan Travelogue made me look at almost every meal that way. It to me, it's genuinely felt like going on this culinary historical journey. But somehow, and I really don't know how the author was able to do this, but the food never overwhelms the relationship between Chizuko and Chizuru. It's in the background, sometimes it's in the foreground. They balance each other. The relationship also does not overwhelm the history. Everything is somehow carefully balanced. And I think there's this saying that goes, the easiest or the quickest way to someone's heart is through their stomach. And this book said, fine, I will do that. And it did that. It did that. Definitely a 5-star read for me. But it also made me think about what happens when the person who is doing the cooking for you lives under colonial rule of your country. Suddenly, the sweet little sayings become significantly more complicated when you think about it. Do you think that is this really genuine tenderness? Is this affection? Is this fascination? Is this attraction? Is this fear? And there are moments where, as I was reading it, I was wondering just how the author was able to write the relationship between these two women in a way that they understand each other, but they also misunderstand each other. And the affection that they have for one another does not magically erase the power dynamics that there is between them. I think this is one of the strongest things about this book. Chizuko really cares a lot about Chizuru, but she still misunderstands her. She doesn't see, she sees her position, but she doesn't understand her that well, because she can admire Taiwan and still also look at Taiwan as this exotic thing that she can consume. She can reject the most obvious expressions of colonialism and imperialism while also still benefiting from the system that the imperialism created. And this distinction is so important. A part that challenged me about this book is there's a point in this book where the gaze turns back towards the traveler. And of course, unexpectedly, it turns towards me or towards the person who is reading this book, because I love reading books from different places and different cultures, cultures that aren't mine. And part of, I think, the joy of reading translated literature is exactly the feeling of you're entering something that is unfamiliar, something that you don't know. But what Taiwan Travelogue quietly asks is, what exactly do we think about? What do we think we are doing when we discover another culture? Are we listening? Are we learning? Or are we just collecting experiences? Are we collecting food? Are we collecting customs? Are we just consuming a different culture? Are we consuming the beautiful places, like when we travel? Are we consuming the historical facts, these little pieces of someone's culture that we can decide to take home with us and say, okay, look what I discovered, look what I found out. And I really appreciated how the book challenged my thinking in this way, because curiosity is wonderful. I think we should always stay curious, but I think curiosity without self-awareness turns into consumption. And I say that as somebody who travels a lot and reads a lot of cultures that are not mine. So it was good to be made aware of that. Am I just consuming, or am I appreciating, how far does my curiosity go? And this all brings me to the author Shuang-zi herself. She is a Taiwanese writer of fiction, essays. She's written literary criticism. She's written manga. She's written video game scripts. She's absolutely talented. And her pen name, Shuang-zi, means twins, and refers to her late twin sister who she used to write together with. And apparently all of that food research had consequences, because there's an interview that she did with the Booker Prize award platform, where she joked that researching for this book also meant that her savings went down and her weight went up, something that I find very funny. I think for me that would be my ultimate goal when researching, if I could just research through food. And then, of course, there is Lin King, who is the translator of the book. She's a Taiwanese American writer and translator who is based between Taipei and New York. And her work really, really in this book deserves a lot of praise and attention, because this is a novel in which interpretation itself is part of the plot of the book. So you are constantly thinking about, like, who is speaking, who is interpreting, which language is being used, and whose version of something am I actually receiving while reading this book. And of course, there is this added layer to the book that Taiwan Travelogue itself is presenting itself as though when you're reading it, you feel like you're reading the translation of a rediscovered Japanese travel memoir. It almost felt real, but of course the memoir is fictional. So you have a Mandarin language Taiwanese novel pretending to be a translated fictional historical writing of a Japanese woman. Very, very fascinating. And the way in which Lin King then translates it into English. So that it's a translation inside a translation inside a translation. And my brain had a wonderful time reading this, and clearly other people have agreed, because the English translation won the 2024 National Book Award for Translated Literature, and in May 2026, Yáng Shuang-zi and Lin King won the International Booker Prize, making Taiwan Travelogue the first ever book translated from Mandarin Chinese to win the prize. Very, very much deserved. And apparently this book has not finished tempting me. The author is actually coming to Germany this autumn. I think we're in August, so in September she will be in Germany. She's scheduled for, I think, 3 or 4 different readings in München, in Hamburg, and I think in Frankfurt also. And I'm sitting here and asking myself, will I go? I would love, love, love to see her. I'd love to meet her, but will my bank account afford this? This is currently a separate discussion, something that I wrote about in my Substack. So I will link that below if you're interested in reading it. Because one thing that I've become increasingly conscious about is the cost of participating in book culture beyond simply just buying books. You buy the book, you read the book, you want to meet the author, to just listen to their writing process, maybe get your book signed. You need to buy the ticket. If it's in a different city, you need to travel. There is food involved. It is a Pandora's box that is very expensive and clearly not accessible for everyone. And because obviously if I travel, or maybe if I don't get to see her in Hamburg and if I have to travel, then I don't think I can eat, like, I don't know, a sandwich or something. That would be disrespectful to the text. I would want to eat at a Taiwanese restaurant. I have Googled and I have found one here in Hamburg. But suddenly, like, seeing the author at this literature festival will probably turn into a very expensive day. So I may have to support this particular tour from a very financially responsible distance. We shall see. I have not decided. I will come back with my answer. So, final thoughts. Back to the book. So, Taiwan Travelogue is exactly what I would want a historical fiction book to do. I'm not even sure if this is a historical fiction or literary fiction. I'm not sure. But for me, it felt like historical fiction. It transported me back into a period, into a period that I knew very, very little about. It made me curious enough to leave the book, research more about the history of Taiwan and, of course, of Japan. It made me stop what I was doing, go research, come back, Google a dish, look at the photo, and suddenly I had like 10 tabs open on my computer and absolutely no memory of how I'd gotten there. But I absolutely enjoyed it. I think that is a compliment to any book. If you're reading it, I loved the history, I loved the politics, I loved the attention to language, I loved the relationship between the two main characters, the yearning, what I thought was going to happen. Like, I loved the train rides, the description of the landscapes, the weather, the atmosphere, the description of the cafes that they went to, the hotels that they stayed at, the furniture in the hotels. I love the way class and colonial power and imperialism sat underneath seemingly ordinary interactions between the characters, between them and the people they met. I absolutely loved the complicated tenderness between the two women. And obviously, I love the book. I think what impressed me the most is that none of these elements felt separate. The history was in the food, the politics was in the language, the colonial relationship was inside the romance in quotes. The romance in quotes was inside the meals, and the act of translation sits underneath absolutely everything. It was like the the basis where everything was based on. And this is something that is very difficult to pull off, and Yang Shuang-zi pulled this off very beautifully. So yes, this deserves 5 stars. It deserved the awards. It deserves the hype. It is absolutely beautiful. It deserves a place on my shelves. It's a scrumptious and delicious read that is basically every possible meaning of the word. It is absolutely scrumptious. I listened to the audiobook. I'm hoping to own a physical copy because this is a book that I would love to read again. Maybe one day travel to Taiwan, and if I'm not able to, go to a Taiwanese restaurant and eat some of the foods that are mentioned in this book. Now, I would like to know from you, what is the book that you're reading in August for the Women in Translation month? And also, particularly if you have read Taiwanese literature, please let me know what I should read next. Where should I continue on this journey? Because Taiwan Travelogue has really opened up a door that I would like to keep walking through. Also, if you have read this book, let me know which meal made you the hungriest, or on which page is the meal or is the recipe, because I feel like this is something that we need to discuss. There is so much in this book. I think this book would make a wonderful book club read or a buddy read. I loved it. I really loved it, and would 100% recommend it to you. Thank you so much for watching, and remember to read widely, read in translation, read diversely, stay curious, and of course, do not read this book while hungry. Thanks for watching and for listening, and see you in my next video. Bye.